Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to give you a walk around of this motor. It's a 150 Evinrude, it's 1996, and I've got the cowling off because I'm replacing these thermostat covers. I cracked one. If you watched my last video on this motor, you saw that I cracked the, or you heard that I cracked that thermostat cap. So it hasn't leaked. I've run the boat a few times, but might as well replace it. They're only about $9 each, and there's two, so I'm just going to go ahead and replace them so I know that I'm safe. But anyway, in so many of my videos, people will ask, what is that particular thing in that frame at this minutes and that seconds, and they're trying to troubleshoot something. And so what I figured I'd do, I'm no mechanic by any means, but I have done so much work on this motor that I could tell you, what I know, and if that helps you troubleshoot this motor, well, that'll be really great. So we'll just start in the back and we'll work our way to the front, and I'll tell you what everything is. So right here, thermostat housing. Inside you've got thermostat spring and an O-ring. Of course you have spark plug wires. Spark plugs wires go from the spark plug into the power pack. I'll explain that in a second. This right here is just a plug. It'll shoot out water if you take this plug out. It's part of the cooling system. It's just seawater. And on the other side is where the hose hooks up if you have a gauge, if you have a water pressure gauge. This is a temperature switch, and when it's activated, it puts the motor into slow. So this wire simply just goes to the power pack, which is under this cover, and the power pack will activate the slow mode, which prevents you from ruining your engine if it's overheating. It only lets you operate at about 1,000 RPMs. There's one of these on the other side too. This wire right here, this green wire, is the temperature sender wire for the gauge. So once again, if you have the gauge, you have that wire. This of course is the head. It's 3 cylinders, one on this side, or 3 on this side, 3 on the other side. They're offset slightly, so you'll notice that this bank of cylinders is slightly higher than this bank because of the way the connecting rods connect into the crank, which is under here. All these hoses are just simply water hoses that allow cooling from the block, basically, around into the intake manifold, or the front of the block where the intake manifold is attached. This is the intake manifold. This right here is the shift interrupt switch. It comes up here and it goes into the power pack through this Cannon plug. It also grounds right over here. It has 2 Cannon plugs, one right here that I have zip tied here, and then one here, and then there's a ground on top of the rectifier, which right there, we'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, this will, when it's closed, it'll retard the motor 1 bank. So it's only firing on 3 cylinders for just a fraction of a second, and that takes the torque off the transmission or the shifter to get it in and out of gear, primarily out of gear. It will kind of slam into gear if this is malfunctioning, but if it's not coming out of gear, or you have this thing disconnected, it will not it'll not come out of gear unless you turn the key off in most cases. And if you're trying to dock or get it on a trailer or anything, that can be pretty annoying. This actually I've replaced, and when you replace it, because the cam doesn't wear at the same rate as the switch, sometimes you have to sand down the little nub on the end of the switch to kind of match it up with that age of the size of the cam. I have a whole video on that, so if you are interested in that, you can watch that video. So under this plastic cover, it goes from here all the way down to here. Right here is just, all it is plastic cover, and there's 3 coils, basically where these ribs are, 1, 2, 3. And each coil hooks up to 2 cylinders, and then there's 2 more wires that come off each coil and go to the power pack, which is under here. I have a video on the replacement of the power pack and the coils, so if you want to check that out, it shows everything under this cover. This cover here, actually you don't see this on many motors because I think they had an overheating problem with the wiring in here. I'm really not sure, but most people have taken that off and discarded it. I actually had to buy this off eBay, off a used motor, and because I wanted to be able to tie to it, and I just wanted it to be complete looking. I went ahead and cut this out. So this might be the only one you see like this unless you do it yourself. I simply just cut out the center to allow this all to cool, and then, you know, assembled it. It's got 2 screws here, screw here, and I think it looks much better. I think it looks finished, and I fixed that heat problem, because the heat really does build up under here. The reason why the heat builds up under here is because right here is the rectifier. That black and silver thing is the unit that transfers AC power from the stator to DC power that the motor can run on. It gets very hot. In fact, it's sitting in a water bath. So you've got this cylinder and this cylinder, and right down the middle is just a hollow cavity that fills up with water, and it feeds all of these jets. It feeds, if there was something here, it would feed that. Like I said, on the other side here, it is right here, and you can see this rubber hose that hooks up to it. This rubber hose goes right up to the gauge, provides pressure to tell the gauge how much water pressure there is. But right in between the V, right here, is just this void, aluminum void, filled with water, and the rectifier has fins on the bottom of it that protrude down into that water to help it cool. There's just a gasket that holds it on, and then you've got this red wire, which provides all of the DC current to run the motor, charge the batteries, run lights, whatever. Everything comes right out of there. There's no black wire because the actual unit grounds into the motor, so there's only red wire. This wire right here, this gray wire, runs the tachometer. So if your tachometer is malfunctioning, that's an early sign that your rectifier is going bad. If it's jumping all over the place, it could be a ground, it could be the gauge, but it also could be your rectifier is going bad. Like I said, this Cannon plug just takes your AC on this side, plugs it in. You got AC going into the rectifier and DC coming out. This wire right here that you can pull on, it actually flexes. If you take this and push on it, you can see it's free to move around. You want to make sure that doesn't get hung up on anything. This is your optical sensor wire, which tells the power pack in here where your motor positioning is. If you take this cover off, I have a video on that also, you'll see there's the timing wheel right under here, the optical sensor is under here, and there's some linkage to advance or retard your timing based on you know, what you need depending on your RPM. There's a high speed adjustment and a low speed adjustment. All of this hooks into your throttle linkage, which is here. So everything works together, and I'll get to that when we get all the way around the motor. So that's pretty much it for this area. There's 2 plugs right here that plug into the top of the power pack, and then part of this goes over to right here, which goes down into the top of the block right here, and that goes to your stator. So under here you have your flywheel and your stator. The stator is what produces AC current, much like an alternator on a car battery. I'm sorry, on a car engine. It's just, you know, a wire wrap spinning around magnets that create the power, and it sends all that power right through this wire right here, and that mates up right here, and we've already covered the rectifier. Under here is the Bendix, and I'll get to that when we talk about the starter. As far as this side of the motor, if you thought that you had a problem with your wiring harness, well, this is part of your wiring harness. It comes up here, goes into the power pack. There's this purple wire in the wiring harness, and some models, I think the 175 horsepower motor has a purple wire coming out of the rectifier. I don't know what it does, but it's part of the wiring harness. It's just not used here on this one. But the wiring harness comes down, goes in here. It's simply, this is just a cover that serves 2 purposes. It helps to keep the wiring harness, which goes from here to here, in position, and then it also takes these high voltage wires here and connects them to the ignition through a Cannon plug. So right under here is a Cannon plug, and if you want to test your starter, or, you know, if you want to isolate the motor to see if there's an electrical problem, you would start the motor, and then while it's running, unplug this cannon plug under here. Then the motor will operate perfectly normal, but it's completely disconnected from the ignition and the battery system. So you can isolate your electrical system so you know if you have a problem motor side or boat side. You cannot stop the motor until you plug back in the cannon plug and turn the key off. Now, if you turn the key off and plug this back in, it'll kill it immediately. But that's a nice way to test if you think you have an electrical problem. Anyway, that's what's under this cover. Cannon plug, wiring run, that's pretty much it. There's nothing over here on this side that's any different from the other side other than what we already talked about, which is in this particular motor, they decided to run the pressure hose for the water pressure gauge off of this head. And then right here is your temperature switch, just like on the other side. These parts are all readily available. This one is the original, so it's 1996, never had a problem with it, but you can get those, they're readily available. Okay, as we work our way around here, we've got the starter solenoid. We've got the positive side of the starter solenoid right under there. We've got the negative side of the starter solenoid, which is right over here. It hooks in here, and then here's where your negative and your positive terminals are on your starter. Now, for whatever reason, they have almost everything wired right into these lugs on the starter solenoid. So your rectifier main power comes right down underneath and hooks into here. Your battery cable hooks into here. There's other wires. Basically everything that is on the positive side of your electrical system on the motor comes from here. And the wiring harness comes right through here as well. Wiring harness continues to go right here into this plug. It comes up right here. Actually, this right here is not part of, this is part of your trim and tilt system. But the wiring harness goes here, and then there's another leg that goes underneath. You'll see that later, which goes into the oiling system, if you still have that. If not, it's just an empty plug. These two are the solenoids for the trim and tilt. One is up, one is down, and it just converts that lower amperage 12 volt from your switch on your helm, or the switch that I just pressed right here. It converts it to a much higher amperage, which is through this solenoid. That way you're not getting all that amperage through the switch, and it doesn't melt the switch or light you up if it shorts out. This is the other side of the throttle assembly. It's got a crossbar that crosses over to the other bank on the other side. I'll show you that when we get around there. But let's go back to the starter. So here's the starter. It hangs in there with these two bolts. You do have to remove the starter solenoid in order to get this to slide down enough to get out, because there is a little shaft that protrudes up into this assembly here. But this is your starter. It's very easy to replace. What's not easy to replace is the Bendix. So on some starters, the Bendix is included on the starter. On this motor, it's separate. You've got separate starter, separate Bendix. Bendix is about this big. It's a gear with a helical gear on it, and as it spins through a reduction gear, it spins very fast, and it throws the teeth up into the flywheel and then turns the motor over. As soon as the motor and the Bendix are spinning at the same speed, it drops back down out of the way so that you can rev your motor without spinning your starter. It's a pretty neat little thing. It's been in there for about 9 years. I replaced it after it was about 10 years old. It cracked, it broke. Now when I put it in there, I greased it pretty good. So I'm hoping that it lasts a very long time, because in order to get to it, you have to take out all of these screws. And in order to get this to this point, you have to take off all of the linkage under here, take this off, and basically lift this entire assembly up. Once it's up, it's very easy. Right here is where there's a little indent on the bottom where the gear sits. So you have a gear right here, which is the reduction gear. You've got the flywheel gear here, which is all under here. I can't remember if the flywheel, I think the flywheel is on top of the stator. So you have to remove the flywheel to get to the stator. That's also original on this motor. Fingers crossed, it doesn't go out. But you've got the flywheel, the reduction gear, and the Bendix all in this area, and that's what starts your motor when the starter's engaged. Let's go ahead and drop this a little bit further. So in the front here we have the air box, and the air box serves a couple purposes. It collects vapor and excess fuel if you're running rich or you choke it, and it helps to balance the vacuum on the carburetors. So to get it off, you just pull these little tabs here, these little rubber tabs. These are actually probably due to be replaced. They are available. And then you just pull this thing off, lift it up, and then there's a little vacuum line right there that goes right here. And then there's a fixed one down here. And I'll tell you what all that's for. So you've got these 6 holes. They've designed this shape, obviously, to create the proper vacuum and allow enough room down the middle here for the fuel pump and the fuel delivery system to sit. And then here's your intake. So this is where all your air comes in that causes the motor to run. Got these rubber things on the carburetor. Here's carburetor. Here's it's called a silencer boot or something, silencer ring, and it mates up with the little ridge in here to help create at least some sort of seal. This will spit out fuel. Normally it would just spit vapor, but if you choke the motor or if there's something happening that's making it run rich, it will actually spit out fuel. That fuel will get spit out right here, and then it'll dribble down through the airbox. If it's a vapor and the motor's running, it'll just suck it in. If it's a liquid, it will drain all the way down to here, and then this hose will suck it back into the fuel rail, which is right over here, and return it to the motor. You have to imagine this is a constantly circulating fuel system. So let's start with the throttle, which is right over here. And the throttle assembly is right down here, and it feeds basically this rod right here. So everything that has to do with the throttle comes right up that rod. This rod will turn as you advance the throttle on the dash. When this rod turns, it turns this, and you can, and this pushes against this. So there's a little wheel right here that pushes here. And then the linkage goes from over there, which goes down to the throttle, over to here. And then as this bar right here turns, it pushes on this cam right here. And that cam rides on this wheel. I'm sorry, this wheel rides on this cam. And as it moves, it advances the throttle all the way open. And then, like I showed you before, it goes right through over to this side, and it opens up. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, it opens up those butterfly valves right inside the throttle body, which is right here. This is throttle body. So you've got a thermoplastic fuel rail, basically, right here. You have a aluminum throttle body, and then you have thermoplastic carburetors. It's kind of sandwiched in there. And I really like this. I think this is one of the reasons why this motor lasts so long, because there's really no moving parts in the carburetor other than the float. Everything that's moving is aluminum. Sometimes they'll put those valves in the thermoplastic, and they just don't last very long. Anyway, this is the throttle. I'm sorry, carburetor. There's 6 of them. I have a whole video on replacing these and a video rebuilding these. This is the fuel rail that supplies fuel to the motor. It's pressurized, and it's a rail that feeds all 3 carburetors on this side and all 3 carburetors on that side. The fuel, I don't know where she is. You gotta call her. She's in the yard somewhere. In the yard somewhere. The fuel rail, pressurized fuel rail, dumps fuel into a chamber in the aluminum part of the throttle body. Intake manifold, really, is what this is called. And then that fuel flows into the top of the bowl, which is right here, and it fills up the bowl with fuel. As the float comes up, it stops the flow of fuel. But this is where all the fuel comes from as far as supplying the bowl. Then this rail right here is the return rail. So excess fuel that either overflows. What? Okay, Jesus. My son's dog got out of the gate. Just went into total panic mode. But fortunately, a neighbor had her, and all is good in the world. Okay, so fuel comes back from the carburetor into this fuel rail right here, right? And this drains and gets sucked up down here back into the system. And that brings us to this assembly right here in the middle. So let me tilt this down just a little bit more. All right, so this is where all the fuel comes from, right here, into this horrible fitting. It's just, obviously they designed it like this on purpose, but it's terrible. You should carry an extra one of these. They break every couple years, and when they break, they just dribble fuel. It's terrible. But all the fuel comes in here, and it's there's a float in here that controls how much fuel gets pushed into the motor, into the fuel rails. So imagine this, all the fuel comes in here, back behind, it gets pressurized by this pump. So fuel comes down, back here, it goes into the pump. Right here, here's the inlet hose that comes basically from here, through there, down there, through the hose, into the pump. This pump is a brand new non-oiler pump. Originally on this motor, on top here was the oiler pump, and I talked about the wiring harness right here, which comes down into this plug right here, which would plug into the oiler pump, which is gone, so that's just capped off. It's been like that for years. I mix my oil. I would recommend you do that because the VRO system potentially could fail, and mixing the oil, I just think it's a much better option for this particular motor. So here's your fuel pump, pressurizes the fuel, goes in here. In here is a float, which allows only a certain amount of fuel to go into this system right here. This right here is the automatic choke. You can actually choke it manually by turning this way, but when you push the key in on a push to choke system, these diaphragms lift and allow maximum fuel flow into the engine, which comes through these two. So the normal flow is through here. When you push to choke, it comes through here, and then all your fuel is running into these two rails. And that's the front here. So down under the fuel pump, you have your shifter. So that stainless steel rail that comes across hooks into a knuckle right there, and that little screw right there is what you unscrew to slide this off to allow the shaft that goes down to the shifter shaft that goes down to the lower unit. And it's really kind of like a dirt bike. You push it down, and you're in first gear, you're in forward. You pull it up once, and you're in neutral, and you pull it up again, and you're in reverse. It's really simple, but that's how it works. And it really just has to be in the same gear. So if you take it out in forward, you got to put it back in forward so the shifter knows where it is. That's how I normally do it. But that is really all of the major components on this motor that you would probably fool with. Everything else is the crank and the block, and everything that we talked about is basically just bolted onto the block. So I hope this video helps you if you were wondering what all these things are. I'll put a link down below for Crowley Marine, I think I'm saying it right. That's where I get some of my parts if I don't get them locally. And they have really the best schematics that I've seen on this motor. And you could take this video and what I'm explaining, and then look at it on the schematic and really get a good idea of what part you need. and you know, you get a 3D version and a 2D version when you look at the schematic. Anyway, thanks for watching. I post new cool videos all the time, totally random, whatever I'm really into. So I hope you subscribe, and at some point I'll probably post a video that you might enjoy again. So thanks for watching. See ya.